Are you telling me that in 6 months I'll be walking down the aisle with the most feared man in all of London? Magnolia Hartwell nearly dropped her cup of tea that had been reheated for the third time that cold October morning. On the other end of the line, her best friend Penelope was cackling like a hyena. Maggie, darling, if someone had told me a year ago that you'd be the only person capable of melting the infamous Cassius Blackwood's heart of ice, I would have suggested immediate psychiatric treatment. But that was still far from happening. At that moment, Magnolia could only think about how her life had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. It all started with the phone ringing insistently at 7 in the morning, when she was still trying to stretch the last grain of instant coffee to make something that remotely resembled a civilized beverage. "Miss Hartwell?" The voice was deep, formal, laden with an impeccable British accent. "My name is Alfred Pemberton, butler of the Blackwood estate. Mr. Cassius Blackwood would like to interview you today for the position of personal governess." Magnolia nearly choked on her watery coffee. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. I didn't apply for any governess position. The Stellar Staffing Employment Agency provided your references. Mr. Blackwood was impressed with your resume. The interview will be at 2 o'clock this afternoon. A car will pick you up." And before she could protest, the call ended. Magnolia stood in the middle of her tiny Brixton apartment kitchen, still in her pajamas, with her red hair in a messy bun that looked more like a bird's nest, trying to process what had just happened. Cassius Blackwood. The name alone was enough to make any sensible person run in the opposite direction. Son of a banking dynasty, heir to an incalculable fortune, and known for destroying careers just for fun. The tabloids dubbed him the Ice Heart of Mayfair, after he fired 300 employees on Christmas Eve 3 years ago. But Magnolia didn't have the luxury of being sensible. Not when the letter from medical school was sitting there on the coffee table, cruelly reminding her that she needed £15,000 by the end of the month, or she'd lose her place in her dream program. "Maggie, are you still there?" Penelope's voice brought her back to reality. "You have to accept. Do you know how much a governess earns working for the Blackwoods? They say it's more than a junior doctor." "Pen, the man is known for making his female employees cry, literally. The last governess ran out of the mansion screaming something about demons in human form." "Irrelevant details. Besides, you're different. You survived 3 years working at Cafe Inferno with that psychopath boss Marcus. If you could survive that tyrant screaming about the perfect cappuccino temperature, you can handle anything." Magnolia sighed, looking around her apartment. The paint on the walls was peeling, the heater made more noise than a locomotive, and she was pretty sure she'd seen a little mouse running through the kitchen last night. It wasn't exactly the ideal environment for studying medicine. What if he really is as cruel as they say? Then you run out of there screaming too. But what if he's not? What if he's just a lonely man who doesn't know how to deal with people? You've always been good at that, Mags. Remember Professor Williams at university? Everyone was terrified of him, but you figured out he just needed someone who wasn't afraid of his outbursts. 3 hours later, Magnolia was standing in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, trying to transform her broke student look into something minimally presentable. She had managed to tame her red curls into an elegant bun, and the black dress she'd bought secondhand last year still fit perfectly. "You can do this," she murmured to her reflection. "It's just a few hours. Go there, impress the man, get the job, pay for medical school, become a doctor, save lives. Simple as that." The car that came to pick her up was a work of art on wheels, a black Bentley that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. The driver, a gray-haired gentleman with a kind smile, opened the door for her with a bow. "First time visiting Blackwood Manor, miss? Is it that obvious?" Magnolia laughed nervously, trying not to touch anything inside the car for fear of breaking something expensive. "Mr. Blackwood has that effect on people, but I can tell you one thing. In 40 years driving for the family, I've never seen him personally request to interview someone. He usually leaves these things to his assistants." That didn't help her nerves at all. Blackwood Manor was even more intimidating in person than in the tabloid photos. It rose like a Gothic fortress in the heart of Hampstead Heath, with its pointed towers piercing the gray October sky. The enormous windows looked like watchful eyes, observing every movement in the perfectly manicured gardens. Alfred Pemberton received her at the entrance, a tall, thin man with impeccable silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. "Miss Hartwell, punctual. Mr. Blackwood appreciates that." His voice echoed through the marble corridors as he guided her through the mansion. "A few basic rules. The master doesn't like small talk, values efficiency above all else, and doesn't tolerate excuses. Questions?" "Just one," Magnolia replied, trying not to feel intimidated by the austere portraits of Blackwood ancestors watching her from the walls. "Why me? I mean, my resume isn't exactly impressive for this type of position." Alfred stopped before two ornate mahogany doors. "Mr. Blackwood has his methods, miss. Better to ask him yourself." The doors opened, revealing an office that seemed to have come straight out of a movie about English aristocracy. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a crackling fireplace, and behind a mahogany desk that could easily serve as a dance floor. "Good God," Magnolia whispered before she could stop herself. Cassius Blackwood was absolutely nothing like she had imagined. Where she expected to find a scowling middle-aged man with the appearance of a movie villain, there was instead a man who couldn't be more than 35, with dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he had run his fingers through it, and the greenest eyes she had ever seen. He wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and was leaning over some papers, an expression of intense concentration on his perfectly sculpted face. When he looked up and saw her standing there, something changed in his expression. For a moment, just a moment, she had the impression of seeing genuine surprise, perhaps even interest. "Miss Hartwell?" The voice was even deeper in person, with a velvety tone that made something strange happen in her stomach. "Please have a seat." Magnolia approached the leather chair in front of the desk, trying to ignore the fact that her legs seemed to have forgotten how to function properly. "I have to admit," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt, "I was surprised by your call. My resume isn't exactly impressive." His lips curved into something that didn't quite reach a smile. "Literature degree from King's College with honors, 3 years managing Café Inferno, an establishment known for its, shall we say, challenging clientele. Currently studying medicine, fluent in French and Italian, impeccable references." He leaned back in his chair. "Why do you think that's not impressive?" "Well, Magnolia blinked, surprised. He had actually read her resume. Completely. "I work at a cafe, Mr. Blackwood. Not exactly the kind of experience that qualifies someone to manage a property like this." "Experience can be taught. Character cannot." His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her shift in her chair. "Do you want to know why I called you for this interview?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Because when I called your references, each person told me the same thing, that you are the most genuinely kind person they know, that you would treat a beggar with the same courtesy as a king, and that, quoting your former boss, you have the patience of a saint and a sharp enough tongue to put any idiot in their place." Magnolia felt her cheeks flush. Marcus said that? Among other colorful things. This time it was definitely a smile. Small but real. "The position I'm offering isn't exactly traditional. You would be responsible for managing my personal schedule, coordinating social events, and—" he hesitated, "occasionally accompanying me to engagements where I'm expected to appear with appropriate company." "Appropriate company?" "Nothing inappropriate," he hastened to clarify, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. "Just business dinners, charity events, that sort of thing. The salary would be £8,000 monthly, with accommodation included if you wish." Magnolia nearly choked. £8,000 per month. That was more than she earned in 6 months at the cafe. "May I ask why?" The words came out before she could stop herself. "I mean, why do you need someone for that?" For a moment, the mask of the implacable businessman slipped completely, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Weariness, loneliness, perhaps even a bit of sadness. "Because, Miss Hartwell," he said softly, "I've discovered that being feared by everyone is quite a lonely existence." And it was in that moment, looking at the most powerful man in London admit his loneliness with such raw honesty that it hurt her chest, that Magnolia Hartwell knew her life was about to change forever. "When can I start?" "So let me get this straight," Penelope said through a mouthful of Chinese takeout. "You're now living in a mansion that has its own bloody library tower, earning more money than a small country's GDP, and your biggest complaint is that your devastatingly handsome boss is polite?" Magnolia groaned, burying her face in one of the silk cushions that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. It had been 3 days since she'd moved into Blackwood Manor, and she was beginning to think she'd made a terrible mistake. "He's not polite, Pen. He's formal, distant, like he's built this invisible wall around himself, and I'm just another piece of furniture he has to occasionally acknowledge." The truth was, Cassius Blackwood was nothing like the cruel tyrant she'd expected. He was worse. He was perfectly, maddeningly professional. Every interaction was courteous, efficient, and completely devoid of the spark she'd glimpsed during their interview. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell. Your schedule is on your desk. The Pemberton Gala is tonight. The car will collect you at 7. Thank you for your assistance today, that will be all." It was driving her absolutely insane. "Maybe he's just nervous?" Penelope suggested, ever the optimist. "You did say he seemed vulnerable during the interview." Before Magnolia could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Alfred appeared in the doorway of her sitting room. Yes, she had an actual sitting room now, complete with a view of the rose gardens. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Blackwood requests your presence in the library. There's been a situation." The way Alfred said situation made Magnolia's stomach drop. She'd heard the staff whisper about Cassius's temper, though she'd yet to witness it firsthand. She found him in the library, standing with his back to her, staring out the massive window that overlooked the grounds. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in a way that screamed barely contained frustration. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Blackwood?" He turned, and she was struck again by how unfairly attractive he was when brooding. His jaw was clenched, those green eyes dark with irritation. "Are you familiar with Victoria Ashworth?" Magnolia blinked. Everyone in London knew Victoria Ashworth, socialite, philanthropist, and according to the tabloids, Cassius's on-and-off romantic interest for the past 2 years. "Of course. She's just informed me through her assistant Naturally that she'll be attending the Morrison charity auction tomorrow night, where I'm expected to give the keynote address." His tone was carefully controlled, but she could hear the edge underneath. "She's also let it be known that she's available for reconciliation." Oh. Magnolia wasn't sure why that information made her chest feel tight. "Congratulations?" He shot her a look that could have frozen fire. "It's not congratulations I'm after, Miss Hartwell. Victoria has a tendency to create scenes, public ones. The last time we encountered each other at a social function, she threw a champagne flute at my head." Despite herself, Magnolia felt her lips twitch. "Did she hit you?" For a moment, his stern expression flickered. "She has excellent aim. So what do you need from me?" "I need you to attend as my companion tomorrow night. Not as my employee, but as my—" He seemed to struggle with the word date. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Magnolia felt heat creep up her neck. "Fake date," she clarified, proud that her voice came out steady. "Obviously." But there was something in his eyes that made her wonder if it was obvious to him at all. "Victoria is less likely to cause a spectacle if she believes I'm otherwise engaged." "And you think she'll believe we're actually together? No offense, Mr. Blackwood, but we hardly seem like a natural match." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe even hurt. "Why do you say that?" "Well, you're—" She gestured vaguely at him. "You. Powerful, wealthy, sophisticated. And I'm a broke medical student who until last week was living in a flat with a mouse problem." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtly masculine that made her pulse quicken. "You're also intelligent, kind, and the first person in years to speak to me like I'm human, rather than a walking bank account." His voice had dropped to that low, velvety tone that did dangerous things to her composure. "I think you underestimate yourself, Miss Hartwell." For a moment, they just looked at each other. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Magnolia was acutely aware of how close he was, how his eyes had darkened, how her own breathing had become shallow. Then he stepped back, and the spell broke. "Alfred will arrange for appropriate attire. The car will collect us at 8. He was back to business mode, but she caught the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for some papers. "Was there anything else?" "Actually, yes." The words came out before she could stop them. "If we're going to convince people we're together, shouldn't we know something about each other beyond our professional arrangement?" He froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if someone asks how we met, what should I say? That you hired me and we fell madly in love over contract negotiations?" A laugh, an actual laugh, escaped him before he could stop it. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger, more approachable, devastating in an entirely different way. "Point taken. Perhaps dinner? Tonight? We could discuss our backstory." "Are you asking me on a fake date to prepare for our fake date?" "If you put it like that, it sounds absurd." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, surprising herself with her boldness, "I think you'll find that most of the best things in life are a little absurd." That earned her another smile, a real one this time, not the polite mask he usually wore. "Dinner it is, then. And Miss Hartwell?" "Yes?" "Perhaps you could call me Cassius, at least when we're rehearsing." As he walked away, Magnolia sank into one of the leather chairs, her heart racing. She was in so much trouble. Because somewhere between his vulnerability about loneliness and that devastating smile, she was beginning to suspect that her feelings about this arrangement were becoming anything but fake. From her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Penelope. "How's life in paradise?" Magnolia typed back, "I think I'm falling for my fake boyfriend." The response was immediate. "Tell me everything." But as Magnolia looked around the grand library, with its leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors, she realized she didn't even know where to begin explaining how her carefully ordered world had been turned completely upside down. All she knew was that tonight, she'd be having dinner with Cassius Blackwood. Just the two of them. And despite every rational thought screaming that this was a terrible idea, she couldn't wait. Magnolia changed her outfit 4 times before settling on a simple emerald dress that brought out her eyes. Not because she was nervous about having dinner with the most eligible bachelor in London. Absolutely not. She was merely being professional. Very, very professional. "Liar," she muttered to her reflection, applying lipstick with slightly trembling hands. When she descended the grand staircase at 8 sharp, Cassius was waiting in the foyer, and the sight of him nearly made her miss a step. Gone was the formal business attire. Instead, he wore dark jeans that hugged his long legs perfectly, and a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his fingers through it, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked relaxed. "You look beautiful," he said. And there was something in his voice that made her think he'd surprised himself with the admission. "Thank you. You look..." She paused, taking in the full, devastating effect of casual Cassius. "Different. Better or worse different. Dangerously different." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she watched his eyes darken with something that definitely wasn't professional interest. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and when she took it, she felt that same electric jolt from earlier. Instead of the formal dining room she'd expected, he led her to a smaller, more intimate space she hadn't seen before. A conservatory filled with flowering plants and twinkling lights, with a table set for 2 by the windows overlooking the moonlit gardens. "Oh," she breathed. "It's beautiful. I thought we might be more comfortable here. Less intimidating than the main dining room." He pulled out her chair and she caught a hint of his cologne as he leaned close. "I had the kitchen prepare something simple. I hope you like Italian." As if on cue, Alfred appeared with wine and what looked like the most incredible pasta she'd ever seen. "So, Cassius said once they were alone. Our backstory. How did we meet? Magnolia twirled pasta around her fork, considering. Well, we can't say you hired me. That's not exactly romantic. What would be romantic? A meet cute. You know, where we bump into each other in an adorable way that's obviously fate. She took a sip of wine, something that probably cost more than her textbooks. Maybe we were both reaching for the same book in a library. Which book? Pride and Prejudice, obviously. You Can Be Mr. Darcy. He nearly choked on his wine. I'm not that much of a proud bastard, am I? Well, you did fire 300 people on Christmas Eve. They were embezzling from the Children's Charity Fund, he said quietly. The timing was unfortunate, but I couldn't let it continue. Magnolia stopped eating. The tabloids never mentioned that part. They never do. He shrugged, but she could see the old hurt in his eyes. It's easier to paint me as the villain. Makes for better headlines. How much of your reputation is actually deserved? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens. Less than you'd think. More than I'd like. He looked back at her. I learned early that it's easier to be feared than disappointed. People expect the worst from me, so I give it to them. That sounds exhausting. It is. The admission seemed to surprise him. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation like this, where someone actually listened. What about Victoria? His expression hardened slightly. Victoria likes the idea of me. The power, the wealth, the status. She's never been particularly interested in the man behind it all. Then why were you with her? Because it was expected, easy, safe. He leaned forward, his eyes intense on hers. She would never challenge me the way you do. I challenge you? From the moment you walked into my office. You looked at me like you were trying to solve a puzzle, not calculate my net worth. The air between them was crackling again, heavy with unspoken tension. Magnolia felt her cheeks flush under his gaze. So, she said, trying to lighten the mood, back to our story. Library, Pride and Prejudice, love at first literary disagreement? What would we disagree about? Whether Elizabeth Bennet should have forgiven Darcy so easily. And what's your position? That love requires forgiveness, but it also requires change. Darcy had to prove he'd grown, not just apologize for his pride. Cassius went very still. And if someone has spent years building walls around themselves, what then? Then someone else has to be brave enough to climb them. The words came out softer than she intended, loaded with meaning she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. They stared at each other across the small table, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Magnolia's heart was racing, and she could see her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Confusion, desire, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Magnolia, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Yes? Tomorrow night, when we're pretending to be together, how should I touch you, to make it believable? The question sent heat spiraling through her. What do you mean? Should I hold your hand? Put my arm around you? His voice had dropped to that low, rough tone that made her pulse stutter. How would a man who was falling for you actually behave? She swallowed hard. He'd find excuses to be close. Brush his fingers against yours when handing you something. Put his hand on the small of your back when guiding you through a crowd. Like this? He reached across the table and traced one finger along her hand where it rested beside her wine glass. The simple touch sent electricity shooting up her arm. Yes, she whispered. And if he wanted to kiss you? In public? To really sell the illusion? Her breath caught. He'd probably start with something small. A kiss on the cheek. Or... She looked at his lips, then quickly away. Or he'd wait for the right moment and make it look spontaneous. The right moment? When everyone's watching, when it would have the most impact. He nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. We should probably practice, to make sure it looks natural. Practice? Her voice came out strangled. The touching. The closeness. He stood and moved around the table, offering her his hand. "Dance with me." There was no music, but she found herself taking his hand anyway, letting him pull her to her feet. In the soft light of the conservatory, with the scent of jasmine in the air and the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, it felt like the most natural thing in the world when he pulled her into his arms. They swayed slowly, and Magnolia was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, his hand on her waist, her palm against his chest, the warmth of him surrounding her. "Like this," he murmured against her ear. "Perfect," she breathed, and meant it. When the song that existed only in their imaginations ended, they didn't step apart. Instead, Cassius lifted his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Magnolia," he said again, and this time it definitely sounded like a prayer. "We're just practicing," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "Of course," he agreed, but his eyes said something entirely different. And as he lowered his head toward hers, Magnolia realized that some kinds of practice were far more dangerous than the real thing. The almost kiss haunted Magnolia all night. She lay in her ridiculously luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The way Cassius had looked at her, the warmth of his hand on her cheek, the way her name sounded on his lips like something precious. They'd been interrupted by Alfred bringing coffee, and the spell had shattered. Cassius had immediately stepped back, running a hand through his hair, that professional mask sliding back into place. That was good practice," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Yes. Very educational." But as she'd walked back to her room, she'd caught him watching her go, and the hunger in his eyes had nothing to do with practice. Now, standing in front of her mirror in the most stunning dress she'd ever worn, a midnight blue gown that Alfred had somehow procured in her exact size, Magnolia barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked sophisticated, elegant, like she belonged in Cassius's world. "Fake it till you make it," she whispered to her reflection. A soft knock interrupted her nervous primping. "Come in." But instead of Alfred, Cassius himself appeared in the doorway, and the sight of him in a perfectly tailored tuxedo nearly stopped her heart. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, devastating, powerful, completely untouchable. Until his eyes met hers in the mirror and his carefully composed expression cracked. "Christ, Magnolia," he breathed. She turned to face him, her pulse racing. "Too much?" "Not enough," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, you look perfect." "Absolutely perfect." He moved closer, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I thought you might need these." Inside were the most beautiful sapphire earrings she'd ever seen, clearly antique, clearly priceless. "Cassius, I can't." "They were my grandmother's. She would have liked you." His fingers brushed her neck as he helped her put them on, and she shivered at the contact. "There. Now you look like you belong." "Do I?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Magnolia, half the women at tonight's event would sell their souls to be in your position, but none of them would wear those earrings as beautifully as you do." The car ride to the Morrison estate was filled with last-minute coaching. "Remember, we've been seeing each other for 2 months, Cassius said, his hand resting on the seat between them, close enough to touch, but not quite. "We met at the Tate Modern. You were there for the Renaissance exhibition. And you were there because I sponsor their acquisitions program. We argued about the attribution of a particular Botticelli." "Of course we did." She laughed, some of her nerves settling. "Let me guess, I was right?" "Naturally. I was smitten by your passion for art history." "And now?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "Now I'm smitten by everything about you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with truth that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. The Morrison charity auction was exactly the kind of glittering event Magnolia had only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, women dripping in diamonds, men who probably owned small countries. As they walked in together, Cassius's hand on the small of her back, exactly as she'd described. She felt every eye in the room turn toward them. "Breathe," he murmured in her ear. "You're doing perfectly." "Cassius." A melodious voice cut through the crowd, and Magnolia's stomach dropped as she recognized Victoria Ashworth gliding toward them. She was stunning in the way that only money and good genetics could achieve. Tall, blonde, with cheekbones that could cut glass and a smile that was all perfect teeth and sharp edges. "Victoria," Cassius replied coolly, his arm tightening protectively around Magnolia's waist. "Darling, you look magnificent as always." Victoria's eyes slid to Magnolia with barely concealed disdain. "And you must be the little governess I've heard so much about." "Actually," Magnolia said, extending her hand with a smile that was pure sugar and steel, "I'm Magnolia Hartwell, Cassius's girlfriend." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. "How quaint. I don't believe we've met before. Which family are you from?" "I'm not from any family you'd know," Magnolia replied smoothly. "I'm actually working on my medical degree, pediatric surgery." "Oh," Victoria's laugh was like broken glass. "How noble. Playing with children." "Saving children's lives," Cassius corrected, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Magnolia is brilliant, the youngest person ever accepted into the program at Imperial." The pride in his voice made something warm bloom in Magnolia's chest, even as Victoria's expression grew colder. "How fascinating." "And tell me, darling," Victoria turned back to Cassius, completely dismissing Magnolia, "are you still planning that trip to Monaco? You know how much I've always loved the yacht." "Actually," Magnolia said before Cassius could respond, "we're thinking of something more intimate. Cassius was just telling me about this little cottage in the Cotswolds. Very romantic." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. "How rustic." "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed across the room, "please take your seats, we're about to begin." As they moved toward their table, Victoria caught Cassius's arm. "We need to talk," she hissed. "Privately." "I don't think so," Magnolia said pleasantly, looping her arm through Cassius's other arm. "We're rather inseparable these days." The look Victoria shot her could have melted steel, but Magnolia just smiled sweetly back. "Problem," Cassius murmured as they took their seats. "Just establishing territory," Magnolia whispered back. His laugh was low and appreciative. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." The auction proceeded smoothly until lot 15, a vintage necklace that Victoria bid on aggressively, clearly trying to show off her wealth. When Cassius raised his paddle to outbid her, the entire room went silent. Going once, going twice. 50,000, Victoria called out, her voice sharp. Cassius looked at Magnolia, something mischievous sparking in his eyes. 100,000. The room erupted in whispers. Victoria's face went white, then red. Sold to Mr. Blackwood. As the auctioneer moved on, Cassius leaned over and fastened the necklace around Magnolia's throat, his fingers brushing her skin in a way that made her breath catch. "Cassius," she whispered, "this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you," he said, and the way he was looking at her made her forget they were supposed to be pretending. From across the room, Victoria watched them with murder in her eyes. "I think," Magnolia murmured, "we may have just declared war." "Good," Cassius said, his hand finding hers under the table. "I was getting bored with peacetime." But as Victoria rose from her seat and headed straight for them, her face a mask of fury, Magnolia realized that some wars had casualties neither side was prepared for. Victoria reached their table with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, her smile sharp enough to perform surgery. "Cassius, darling, I simply must borrow you for a moment. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Her eyes flicked dismissively to Magnolia. "I'm sure your little friend won't mind." "Actually," Magnolia said, standing gracefully, "I need to powder my nose anyway, don't let me keep you." Cassius's eyes flashed with something that looked like panic. "Magnolia." "It's fine," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "I'll be right back." But as she walked toward the ladies' room, she could hear Victoria's voice rising, sharp and vindictive. Her curiosity getting the better of her, Magnolia ducked behind a marble pillar, close enough to eavesdrop. Really, Cassius, a charity case? How delightfully democratic of you. Careful, Victoria. His voice was deadly quiet. You're talking about the woman I love. Magnolia's heart stopped. The woman he loved? Love? Victoria's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, darling, you can't be serious. She's pretty enough, I'll give you that, but she's so obviously after your money. Did you know she was about to lose her place at medical school? Financial difficulties, apparently. How do you know that? I have my sources. The poor little orphan, desperate enough to take any job that came along, even playing girlfriend to London's most eligible bachelor. Magnolia felt the blood drain from her face. Victoria knew. Somehow she knew about the financial arrangement, about why Magnolia had really taken the job. It's not like that, Cassius said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Isn't it? Tell me, when exactly did you fall in love with her? Before or after you offered to pay her medical school fees? The silence that followed was deafening. That's what I thought, Victoria continued, triumph evident in her voice. She's playing you, darling, and rather well, I must admit, but we both know you're not the romantic type. You're practical like me. We make sense together, Cassius. We always have. Magnolia couldn't listen anymore. She stumbled toward the actual ladies' room, her vision blurry with unshed tears. In the ornate bathroom, she gripped the marble sink, staring at her reflection. The expensive dress, the priceless earrings, the necklace worth more than her education. What was she doing? Victoria was right. She was playing a part, pretending to be something she wasn't. And for a moment tonight, she'd actually believed it was real. Her phone buzzed. A text from Penelope. How's the fairy tale going, Cinderella? The irony wasn't lost on her. Like Cinderella, she'd been living in a fantasy that would end at midnight. The only difference was that her Prince Charming had paid for the privilege. When she emerged from the bathroom, Cassius was waiting in the hallway, his face anxious. There you are. I was worried when you didn't come back. I needed some air. She couldn't quite meet his eyes. Is Victoria gone? Yes, but Magnolia, we need to talk about what she said. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice interrupted them. Mr. Cassius Blackwood will now address us about tonight's beneficiary, the Children's Heart Foundation. Cassius closed his eyes briefly. I have to do this speech, but after... Go, Magnolia said, forcing a smile. I'll be right here. She watched him walk to the podium, so confident and commanding, and felt her heart break a little more. He belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. She was just visiting. His speech was eloquent, passionate, moving. He spoke about children who needed heart surgery, about giving them a chance at life, about how everyone deserved access to medical care regardless of their circumstances. The irony of it all made Magnolia want to laugh and cry at the same time. As he concluded to thunderous applause, Magnolia made a decision. She couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't pretend to be someone she wasn't, couldn't let herself believe in something that was built on a business arrangement. She was halfway to the exit when a familiar voice stopped her. Leaving so soon? Magnolia turned to find an elegant older woman watching her with kind but knowing eyes. She recognized her from the society pages, Lady Catherine Morrison, their hostess. I'm not feeling well, Magnolia lied. Nonsense. You're running away. Lady Catherine's smile was gentle but firm. From what, I wonder? The pretense or the possibility that it might be real? I'm sorry? My dear, I've been watching society matches for 40 years. I know the difference between a business arrangement and a love affair. She moved closer, lowering her voice. That young man has been looking at you all evening like you hung the moon, and you've been looking at him like he might break your heart. It's complicated. The best love stories usually are. Lady Catherine glanced toward the ballroom where Cassius was clearly searching the crowd. He's looking for you, you know. Has been since the moment you disappeared. Lady Morrison, you don't understand. I understand more than you think. Her expression grew serious. Victoria Ashworth told me an interesting story tonight, about financial arrangements and desperate circumstances. She seemed to think it would shock me. Magnolia's cheeks burned. I should go. Should you? Before you hear the rest of it? Despite herself, Magnolia hesitated. You see, Victoria neglected to mention that young Blackwood has been anonymously funding medical scholarships for underprivileged students for the past 5 years. Dozens of them. He doesn't know that I know I'm on the board of trustees. Lady Catherine's smile was sly. Funny thing about men like Cassius. They're terrible at expressing their feelings directly. Much easier to solve problems, write checks, create opportunities. What are you saying? I'm saying that a man who spent years ensuring bright young people can afford medical school might have other motivations for hiring a particular medical student than simple convenience. Before Magnolia could respond, Cassius appeared at her elbow, slightly out of breath. There you are. I thought. He stopped, taking in her expression, the way she was standing apart from him. What's wrong? Lady Catherine squeezed Magnolia's arm. I'll leave you two to sort this out, but my dear, she whispered, don't let pride rob you of happiness. There's enough tragedy in the world without creating our own. As Lady Morrison glided away, Cassius stepped closer, his green eyes searching Magnolia's face. Talk to me. What happened? Did you know? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. About my financial situation? Before you hired me? His face went very still. Magnolia, did you know? She repeated. A long pause. Then quietly, yes. The admission hit her like a physical blow. So Victoria was right. This whole thing, the job, the arrangement, pretending to be your girlfriend, it's all just charity. You felt sorry for me. That's not, it is. The words came out louder than she intended, and several nearby guests turned to look. I'm your latest charitable project, the poor medical student you decided to save. If you would just listen. No. She was backing away from him now, the beautiful necklace suddenly feeling like a chain around her throat. I can't do this. I can't pretend anymore. Magnolia, please. But she was already walking away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, looking like she'd just ripped his heart out. Which, if she was being honest, was exactly how she felt about her own. Magnolia spent the entire ride back to Blackwood Manor staring out the window, the silence between her and Cassius so thick you could cut it with a knife. He'd tried to speak twice, but she'd turned away both times, clutching Lady Morrison's necklace like armor against the pain in her chest. She made it exactly 3 steps into the mansion before the tears started. Magnolia, Cassius began, but she was already running up the grand staircase, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to heartbreak. In her room, she tore off the beautiful dress, the priceless earrings, the necklace that now felt like a lie around her throat. Standing in her simple cotton pajamas, surrounded by luxury she'd never asked for, Magnolia finally let herself fall apart. Her phone rang. Penelope. How did it go? Are you Mrs. Blackwood yet? Pen. Magnolia sobbed into the phone. I've made such a mess of everything. Whoa, what happened? Did Prince Charming turn into a toad? Through hiccuping tears, Magnolia told her everything. Victoria's revelations, the scholarship discovery, Cassius's admission, the way he'd looked when she walked away. Oh, honey, Penelope said softly when she finished. You're an idiot. Excuse me? A complete, total, magnificent idiot. He's been in love with you this whole time, and you ran away because you found out he wanted to help you before he even met you. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Maggie, the man has been funding medical scholarships for years. Years. That's not charity, that's character. And then he meets you, brilliant, stubborn, beautiful you, and suddenly his anonymous good deed gets a face. Magnolia wiped her nose with a tissue. But I'm still just his charity case. Are you? Or are you the reason he stopped being anonymous about helping people? Maybe you inspired him to get personally involved instead of just writing checks from his ivory tower. Before Magnolia could respond, there was a soft knock at her door. Miss Hartwell? Alfred's voice was gentler than usual. Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this." She opened the door to find the elderly butler holding a manila envelope. His expression carefully neutral, but his eyes kind. "He also wanted me to tell you that your car will be ready whenever you wish to leave. No pressure, miss, he wanted you to know the truth. All of it." Alone again, Magnolia stared at the envelope. Her name was written on it in Cassius's bold handwriting, and underneath 2 words, "The truth." Inside were documents, bank statements, scholarship records, and a letter. "My dearest Magnolia, you're right to be angry. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was a coward. I've spent so many years protecting myself that I forgot how to be honest when it mattered most. The truth is this. I started the scholarship program after my mother died. She was a nurse, brilliant and compassionate, but she came from nothing. She used to tell me that intelligence shouldn't be a privilege of the wealthy. When she passed, I wanted to honor that belief. For 5 years, I helped students anonymously because I didn't want recognition. I wanted to do good without expecting anything in return. It was enough to know I was making a difference. Then Stellar Staffing mentioned you, a medical student struggling financially, working 3 jobs to stay afloat, maintaining perfect grades despite impossible circumstances. I could have simply added you to the scholarship list. It would have been easier, cleaner. But I wanted to meet the woman who worked at Cafe Inferno, infamous for its difficult customers, and still found time to volunteer at the children's hospital. I wanted to meet someone who wrote her application essay about becoming a pediatric surgeon, because children deserve advocates, not just doctors. So yes, I orchestrated our meeting. Yes, I knew about your financial situation. And yes, I offered you a job that paid enough to solve your immediate problems. But everything that happened after, every smile, every laugh, every moment that made me feel human again, that was real. That was you, showing me what I'd been missing behind my walls. I fell in love with your kindness to Alfred when you thought no one was watching. I fell in love with the way you argue about Pride and Prejudice like your life depends on it. I fell in love with your terrible jokes and your fierce loyalty and the way you make me want to be worthy of the man you see when you look at me. The woman I love isn't my charity case. She's my salvation. If you can forgive a proud, stupid man who took too long to say what should have been said from the beginning, I'll be waiting in the conservatory where we danced. If not, I understand. Either way, the scholarship is yours, no strings attached. You've earned it 1,000 times over. All my love, Cassius P.S. The earrings are yours to keep regardless. My grandmother would have adored your fierce spirit. Magnolia read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Through her window, she could see light glowing in the conservatory and her heart clenched. She looked at herself in the mirror, red-eyed, pajama-clad, clutching a letter that had just turned her world upside down again. Then she thought about Lady Morrison's words, "Don't let pride rob you of happiness." "Oh, bloody hell," she muttered, grabbing a robe. She found him exactly where he'd promised to be, standing by the windows where they'd danced, still in his tuxedo but disheveled now, his bow tie undone and hanging around his neck. He looked up when she entered, hope and fear warring in his green eyes. "You came?" he said quietly. "You wrote me a letter," she replied, holding it up. "A really, really good letter. I meant every word." They stood there looking at each other across the space that felt both infinite and impossibly small. "I'm sorry I ran away," Magnolia said finally. "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of this being too good to be true. Of falling for someone so far out of my league that I'd need oxygen masks to reach him." She took a step closer. "Of being someone's charity case instead of someone's choice." "Magnolia." He moved toward her, stopping just within reach. "You were never my charity case. You were my miracle. Even though you had to pay me to spend time with you. Even though I was too much of a coward to tell you how I felt without the safety net of a business arrangement." His smile was rueful. "Turns out I'm quite terrible at romance." "Terrible?" She laughed despite her tears. "Cassius, you bought me sapphire earrings and outbid your ex-girlfriend at a charity auction. You wrote me a letter that made me cry happy tears. You're not terrible at romance, you're devastating at it. Does that mean you forgive me? That depends. She stepped closer, close enough to touch. Are you going to kiss me this time? Or are we still practicing? His answer was to cup her face in his hands and kiss her like she was the air he needed to breathe. It was nothing like the careful, controlled man she'd thought she knew. This kiss was desperate, passionate, full of everything he'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. Not the governess, not the medical student, not the woman I hired. I love Magnolia Hartwell, who argues with me about books and makes me laugh and sees something good in a man everyone else fears. I love you too, she whispered back. The real you, not the reputation, not the money, not the carefully constructed walls. I love the man who funds scholarships in secret and gets jealous over fictional characters and looks at me like I'm something precious. You are precious. You're everything. As he kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise, Magnolia realized that sometimes the best love stories started with the wrong reasons and found their way to the right ones. And sometimes, just sometimes, charity cases and ice kings could become something beautiful together. 3 months later, Magnolia woke up in Cassius's arms for the first time, sunlight streaming through the windows of the master bedroom she now shared. They'd taken things slowly after their reconciliation, dating properly this time, without contracts or pretense, just two people falling deeper in love every day. Good morning, Dr. Hartwell. Cassius murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. Not yet, she laughed, turning in his arms. Still 6 months of rotations left. But you passed your surgery exam yesterday. Top of your class, if I recall. His eyes were warm with pride. I believe that calls for celebration. What did you have in mind? Instead of answering, he reached into the nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Magnolia's heart stopped. Cassius. Before you panic, he said quickly, sitting up. This isn't what you think. I mean, it is, but not right now. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. God, I'm making a mess of this. She sat up too, pulling the sheet around herself, heart hammering. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that I bought this ring 2 weeks ago. I'm saying that I've been carrying it around like a lovesick teenager, waiting for the perfect moment. I'm saying that I love you so much it terrifies me, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. He opened the box, revealing the most stunning antique diamond ring she'd ever seen. Art Deco, elegant, clearly a family heirloom. But I'm also saying that I know you need to finish medical school, start your residency, build your career. I don't want you to think I'm trying to rush you or trap you or... She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and joyful and full of yes. Is that a yes to the someday proposal? He asked when they broke apart, slightly dazed. That's a yes to everything, she whispered. To someday, to forever, to you. The ring fit perfectly, because of course it did. Everything about them fit perfectly now. There's something else, Cassius said, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. The hospital board approved the new pediatric wing, the Magnolia Hartwell Center for Children's Cardiac Surgery. You didn't. Her eyes went wide. I absolutely did. Your future patients deserve the best facilities, and it seemed fitting that the woman who's going to revolutionize pediatric surgery should have a wing named after her. Cassius Blackwood, you ridiculous, wonderful man. She was crying and laughing at the same time. I love you so much. Their blissful morning was interrupted by Alfred clearing his throat diplomatically from the doorway. Forgive the intrusion, sir, but there's a situation that requires your immediate attention. What kind of situation? Cassius asked, immediately alert. The kind that involves Miss Ashworth in your study, having bypassed security, currently destroying several priceless first editions. Cassius was out of bed and pulling on clothes before Alfred finished speaking. Call the police. Already done, sir. They're on their way. Magnolia was right behind him, throwing on jeans and a sweater. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. She could be dangerous. Cassius? Magnolia's voice was firm. We're in this together, remember? Besides, I've been wanting to have a word with Victoria for months. They found Victoria in the study, mascara streaked, hair disheveled, surrounded by torn pages from what looked like a first edition Shakespeare. She'd clearly been drinking. There you are, she shrieked when she saw them. The happy couple. How touching. Victoria, what the hell are you doing? Cassius stepped protectively in front of Magnolia. What am I doing? What am I doing? Victoria laughed high and manic. I'm watching my entire life fall apart because of some nobody from nowhere who thinks she can just waltz in and steal what's mine. I was never yours, Cassius said quietly. We were perfect together. We made sense. And then she, Victoria pointed a shaking finger at Magnolia, comes along with her sweet little sob story and her fake innocence, and suddenly you're writing love letters and buying hospital wings. Victoria, Magnolia said calmly, stepping out from behind Cassius, you need help. I need help? I need help? Victoria grabbed a crystal paperweight from the desk. You ruined everything, you and your pathetic charity case romance. She hurled the paperweight at Magnolia, who ducked as it shattered against the wall behind her. That's enough. Cassius's voice was deadly quiet. In 2 strides, he'd crossed the room and caught Victoria's wrists before she could grab anything else. You're done. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed, struggling against his grip. Both of you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of gold digger she really is. I'll ruin her reputation, destroy her career. No, Magnolia said, her voice steel-wrapped in silk. You won't. She pulled out her phone, showing the screen to Victoria. Because I've been recording this entire lovely conversation. Harassment, destruction of property, assault with a deadly weapon. I think that's quite enough to keep you busy with your own legal troubles for a while. Victoria's face went white, then red, then purple. You little... Dr. Hartwell, Magnolia corrected with a sweet smile. And soon to be Mrs. Blackwood, though I think I'll keep my name professionally. Dr. Hartwell Blackwood has such a nice ring to it, don't you think? The police arrived just as Victoria lunged for Magnolia again, Cassius easily restraining her while officers took control of the situation. Later, after statements were given, and Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still screaming threats that no one took seriously, Magnolia and Cassius sat in the conservatory, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset. So, Cassius said, playing with the engagement ring on her finger. That happened. Are you having second thoughts about marrying someone who apparently attracts unhinged ex-girlfriends? Never. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her ring finger. Though I have to say, watching you handle Victoria was incredibly attractive. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Too late for that. You're stuck with me now. Good, he said, pulling her closer. I was hoping you'd say that. Although, Magnolia mused, curling against his side, we should probably discuss the wedding. Nothing too elaborate, maybe just family and close friends. Cassius was quiet for a moment. Actually, I had an idea about that. Oh? What would you say to a Christmas wedding, here at the manor? Alfred's been hinting that he'd like to plan it, and I think he might actually cry with joy if we let him. Magnolia laughed, thinking of the dear old butler who'd become like a grandfather to her. Alfred planning our wedding? He'll probably have the whole thing organized by next week. Probably. Cassius grinned. So is that a yes? To a Christmas wedding planned by Alfred in the most beautiful house in England, marrying the man I love more than life itself? She kissed him softly. That's the easiest yes I've ever given. As they sat together watching the stars come out, Magnolia reflected on how far they'd come from that first awkward interview. From fake girlfriend to real fiancé, from charity case to equal partner, from 2 broken people to one perfectly imperfect love story. Cassius? Thank you. For what? for being brave enough to let me climb your walls." He tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to keep climbing." And in the conservatory where they'd first danced, where they'd first kissed, where they'd found their way back to each other, the future spread out before them like a promise, full of love, laughter, and happily ever after. 6 months later, Christmas Eve. "Magnolia Hartwell, if you don't stop pacing, you're going to wear a hole in that Persian rug." Penelope laughed from her perch on the window seat of the bridal suite, a champagne flute in her hand and mischief in her eyes. "I'm not pacing," Magnolia protested, then immediately proved herself wrong by taking another lap around the room. "I'm energetically reflecting. You're nervous about marrying the man you've been living with for 6 months? I'm not nervous about marrying him. I'm nervous about tripping down the aisle in front of 200 people in a dress that costs more than most people's cars." The dress in question hung like a dream on the antique armoire. Ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, elegantly simple yet breathtaking. Cassius had insisted she choose whatever she wanted, price no object, but Magnolia had fallen in love with this one the moment she saw it. "You look absolutely radiant, Miss Magnolia," Alfred said from the doorway, his eyes suspiciously bright. In the months since their engagement, he'd thrown himself into wedding planning with the fervor of a man who'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. The guests are seated, the flowers are perfect, and Master Cassius is, well, he's a wreck, but a very handsome wreck. He's nervous too? Magnolia felt some of her own anxiety ease. "My dear, the man has changed his tie 4 times and asked me twice if he's worthy of you. I finally had to remind him that you said yes, which suggests you think he is." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Dr. Eleanor Hartwell peered in, Magnolia's adoptive mother, the woman who'd taken in a frightened 8-year-old orphan and given her a family. "Oh, darling," Eleanor breathed, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "You look like an angel." "Mom, don't cry yet," Magnolia laughed, embracing the woman who'd made her believe in happy endings. "Save it for the ceremony." "Too late," Eleanor sniffled. "I've been crying on and off for weeks. I'm just so proud of you. Not just because you're marrying into one of England's most prominent families, but because you found someone who loves you exactly as you are. Plus," Penelope added with a grin, "he's stupidly rich and gorgeous. That doesn't hurt." The door opened again, and Lady Catherine Morrison swept in, resplendent in emerald velvet. "Ladies, it's time. The groom is getting impatient, half the congregation is in tears already, and if we don't start soon, Alfred might actually expire from excitement." As they made their way downstairs, Magnolia caught glimpses of the transformation Alfred had wrought. Blackwood Manor looked like something from a fairy tale. Garlands of evergreen and white roses everywhere, thousands of twinkling lights, and the grand staircase carpeted in ivory silk. At the bottom of the stairs, her breath caught. Through the open doors of the ballroom, she could see the aisle lined with candles and winter flowers. Guests turned expectantly toward the altar, and there, at the front, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, Cassius. Their eyes met across the distance, and his face lit up with a smile that made her forget about everyone else in the room. He mouthed "beautiful," and she felt her heart skip. "Ready, darling?" Eleanor asked, offering her arm. "More than ready." The string quartet began the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon, and Magnolia started down the aisle on her mother's arm. She was vaguely aware of the guests, old friends from university, colleagues from the hospital, Cassius's business associates, the entire household staff beaming with pride. But her focus was entirely on the man waiting for her. He looked like he might cry, which made her want to cry, which would have been a disaster for her carefully applied makeup. When they reached the altar, Eleanor kissed her cheek and whispered, "Be happy, my love," before placing Magnolia's hand in Cassius's. "You're shaking," he murmured, squeezing her fingers. "So are you," she whispered back. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Magnolia barely heard the opening words. She was lost in Cassius's green eyes, in the way he was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never thought to make. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional vows and readings until they reached the moment they'd both been waiting for, their personal vows. Cassius went first, his voice strong despite the emotion clearly threatening to overwhelm him. Magnolia, 6 months ago, I was a man who had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. I lived behind walls I'd built so high, I'd forgotten there was a world beyond them. Then you walked into my office in a second-hand dress with fire in your eyes and kindness in your heart, and you changed everything. His voice cracked slightly. You saw something good in me when I couldn't see it myself. You challenged me, frustrated me, made me laugh, made me want to be worthy of the man you believed I could become. You didn't just climb my walls. You made me want to tear them down. Magnolia was definitely crying now, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. I promise to love you not just with grand gestures and expensive gifts, but with everyday kindness. I promise to support your dreams even when they scare me, to hold you when you're sad, to celebrate your victories like they're my own. I promise to never let pride come between us again, and to remember every day that loving you is the greatest privilege of my life. Oh, bloody hell, Penelope muttered from behind her, audibly sniffling. When it was Magnolia's turn, she took a shaky breath and looked into the eyes of the man who'd become her whole world. Cassius, they say you can't build happiness on someone else's foundation, but I think they're wrong. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me a chance to become who I was always meant to be. You saw my potential when I couldn't see past my circumstances. You believed in me before I believed in myself. She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his touch. I promise to love all of you, the powerful businessman and the vulnerable man, the generous heart hidden behind the stern exterior, the romantic who plans perfect evenings and writes letters that make me cry. I promise to be your equal partner in everything, to never let you build those walls again, and to remind you every day that you deserve love not because of what you can give, but because of who you are. By the time they exchanged rings, her grandmother's simple gold band for him, a matching one for her, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. By the power vested in me, the minister said with a beaming smile, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Cassius cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Hello, Mrs. Blackwood. Hello, husband. The kiss was soft, sweet, perfect, a promise of all the kisses to come. The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers, but Magnolia barely heard it. In that moment, there was only Cassius, only love, only the beginning of their forever. As they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Magnolia caught sight of Alfred dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief and grinning like he'd personally arranged their entire love story. Which, she reflected with a smile, he rather had. Later, after dinner and dancing and cake and more champagne than was probably wise, Magnolia found herself on the terrace with her new husband, wrapped in his arms under the winter stars. Any regrets? He asked softly. Only that it took us so long to get here. Worth the wait, though. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her everything. Cassius Blackwood, you are worth every moment of doubt, every tear, every sleepless night wondering if this was too good to be true. And now I know it's not too good to be true, it's just true. We're true. As he kissed her under the Christmas stars, snow beginning to fall like nature's confetti, Magnolia thought about the scared girl who'd answered an impossible phone call 6 months ago, never dreaming it would lead to this moment. Sometimes the best love stories started with the wrong reasons and found their way to the right ones. Sometimes charity cases became queens, and cruel hearts became kind. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who loved you not despite your circumstances, but because of everything you'd overcome to become who you were meant to be. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Blackwood, Cassius whispered against her lips. Merry Christmas, my love. And they lived happily ever after, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it.